The Imperium of Man is a galactic empire, meaning that it stretches across the entire galaxy as a cohesive force, a feat that can only be achieved if resources can effectively be distributed throughout the entire empire in a quick way. For example, if an Imperial planet is being attacked by orcs in the eastern part of the galaxy, the Imperial war machine must have the capability of mobilizing a military force to go defend that empire no matter where the reinforcement comes from. Now, in order to do that, the Imperium needs faster than light travel in order to quickly respond to such a threat. This means of transportation is called warp travel. In its simplest form, warp travel works by taking a ship that exists in the real space and then launching it into the immaterium by means of a warp engine and then traveling through that otherworldly dimension called the warp, sometimes referred to as ether or the immaterium, and then exiting out of that dimension back into real space at a speed that couldn't be achieved through regular Newtonian means of propulsion. This process of warp travel is crucial and something that we're going to talk about today in another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. If you're new to the channel, allow me to introduce myself. I am your host, Gersh1, your guide through the grimdark universe of Warhammer 40,000. Now, if you guys are interested in learning more about the lore or the mythology of the Warhammer 40K universe, subscribe to the channel. And if you guys have any video suggestions or any questions about the universe, comment down in the comment section below. I'll be down there talking to you guys. And if you enjoy this style of content, please hit the like button. It sends this video out to more people who are 40K fans, and then the channel can grow and more lore videos can be produced. So thank you guys so much for liking, commenting, and sharing. But with all that said, let's get into 40 facts and lore on warp travel. To better understand warp travel, we should look at how a standard Imperial ship travels through the immaterium. Now, the standard spacecraft enters the warp by activating its warp engines. As a ship leaves the material universe, it enters a corresponding point in warp space. The ship is then carried along by the tides and the currents of the warp. After traveling in this fashion for an appropriate time, the ship uses its warp engines to drop back into real space. Now, because the material universe and the warp move relative to one another, the void ship reappears in a completely new position several light years from the starting point. This process is called a jump or a hop, and the process of entering or leaving is known as a drop, a shift, or a translation. Now, unguided journeys through the warp are usually undertaken in short jumps of up to 4 to 5 light years. Longer jumps are unpredictable and dangerous. The tides of warp space move in complex and inconsistent patterns, and the void ships attempting longer hops often end up widely off course. Were these limitations to apply to all warp travel, then humanity would have never spread throughout the galaxy as it has. It is possible to make longer jumps of many light years by steering a void ship in the warp itself, sensing, responding to, and exploiting its currents, and thereby directing the craft towards a corresponding point in the material universe. Now, only the strain of human mutants known as Navigators can pilot a craft through the warp in this way. You see, some individuals are sensitive to the movements of warp space. They can, for example, sometimes tell that a spacecraft is approaching even before it drops back into the material universe. Human sensitivity to the warp is not generally well developed, but in a minority of people, this sensitivity is far more finely tuned. These people are known as psychers, and they are able to consciously control and use the energies of the warp to affect the material universe. The psyker known as a navigator possesses the psychic gifts of a specific kind that allow them to use their powers to steer spacecrafts in the warp. A tool these navigators use is the Astronomicon, a psychic homing signal centered upon Terra. It is powered by the Emperor himself. The Astronomicon cannot be detected in the real universe, only in the warp. It is by means of this signal that the navigators can steer their void ships over long distances. The Astronomicon signal is strongest closest to Terra, and it gets increasingly weaker further away. It extends over a spherical area with a diameter of about 50 light years. The Astronomicon does not extend to the extreme fringes of the galaxy, and because Terra is situated in the galactic west, its signal does not reach a massive swath of the eastern part of the galaxy at all. Now, although this beacon helps guide ships traveling through the warp, there are many difficult aspects of the journey, such as the nearly impossible way to detect the spatial movements of warp currents. In many ways, this ship can only blindly carry on with its crew trusting that the navigator is going in the right direction. The longer a ship remains in warp space, the greater the chances of encountering some unpredictable current that can turn it unknowingly off course. These are known as warp storms, and not only do they obscure the signals of the Astronomicon, it is also dangerous for spacecraft traveling nearby. No spacecrafts can venture within a warp storm and expect to survive, although there are tales of miraculous escapes and of ships being thrown tens of thousands of light years off course. Systems have been created to assist navigators, however these mostly apply to actions taken before a warp jump. For example, all warp drives incorporate navigational mechanisms. When the void ship is in real space, these monitor the ever-shifting movements of that part of the warp corresponding to the void ship's current position. It is basically a window into warp space. By means of observing these movements in the warp, it is possible to calculate a course, corrective maneuvers, and approximate journey time to a proposed destination. Calculation relies on the assumption that the warp currents observed from real space don't change significantly during the flight itself. This basic method is known as a calculated jump. It's not safe to make a calculated jump of more than 4 light years at one go. The longer the jump, the greater the chances of a significant change in warp current movements. Now, the second and more effective form of warp navigation is the piloted jump. This method relies upon 2 factors, the navigators and the psychic beacon of the Astronomicon. The navigators on board a ship in the warp is able to pick up the signals from the Astronomicon and can steer the spacecraft through the warp, compensating for current changes as he goes along. A piloted jump can cover a far longer distance than a calculated jump. Most piloted jumps are no more than 50,000 light years at one time, but longer jumps have been made. Now, a typical interstellar voyage might begin with a cargo ship lying in orbit around an imperial world. Tiny shuttlecraft busily transfer precious minerals, foodstuffs, crew, and manufactured items from the world below. The loading procedure may take solar days or weeks as the shuttle returns time and time again to the huge void ship. Once loading is complete, the colossal spacecraft slowly accelerates out of orbit under the power of its main drives. The void ship heads outward towards the rim of the solar system, carefully increasing speed by tiny increments as it goes. Although the vessel's engines are capable of terrifying acceleration, the risk of collision with interplanetary debris is high if the void ship accelerates too quickly or too much. As the sun shrinks in the ship's wake, the density of debris lessens, and the ship's speed reaches approximately 1% of a light speed. After a solar week of travel, the void ship arrives at its final destination. This is the jump point, lying around the star system like a circumference of a circle. Once this invisible line has been crossed, it's safe to activate the warp engines. A crew careless or foolhardy enough to prematurely activate warp drives will be lucky to find their ships hurled thousands of light years off course. More than likely, the void ship would be torn apart and destroyed, never to be heard from again. With the safe activation of its warp drives, the ship is then plucked out of the real universe and enters the dimension of warp space. Its true interstellar journey has just begun. Ships traveling in warp space do so by means of jumps varying in length of up to 5,000 light years. Only a long journey would involve more than a single jump. Even so, almost 2 solar weeks pass on board ships before the craft is ready to end its jump. Meanwhile, because of time shift in warp space, over a year has passed in the real universe. The ship will then re-enter real space just beyond a jump point of its destination solar system. If it's lucky, the ship will come close to the jump point. Otherwise, it may take many extra solar weeks to reach the inner planets. The ship is now ready for its final haul, beginning by broadcasting its destination and then establishing a new time coordinate. You see, time in warp space is so different from time in normal space that the crew has no idea whether their journey has taken a few solar months or standard years. The void ship travels at approximately 1% of light speed, decelerating gradually through the dense inner region. Eventually, the ship reaches its destination, where swarms of tiny shuttles once again make themselves busy loading and unloading cargo and passengers in preparation for the ship's next journey. In theory, it's possible to travel anywhere through warp space. However, the shifting tides of the warp make it easier to travel from some systems to the other. The short warp jumps are always more accurate than longer ones. This is particularly true when moving a large fleet, which may become spread out across several light years of space over an extended journey. Long-established and well-charted warp space channels connect star systems and entire regions of the galaxy, providing relatively predictable conduits through which the majority of Imperial ships pass. And then there are warp gates, which is a point in real space which is linked to another point in real space by a tunnel through warp space. The tunnel somehow avoids the normal disturbances of warp space, allowing a journey to be made with a fixed time and relative safety. And the existence of warp gates represents something of a mystery, a much debated range over whether they are natural or artificial. If artificial, then none can say who made them or for what purpose. Some warp gates have artificially been enhanced, their entrances delineated by mechanical constructions whose exact functions can only be guessed at. Other warp gates are mere black holes in space. The largest are easily big enough to permit the passage of spacecrafts and are usually situated at the edge of a solar system or amongst its outer planets. Other gates are only large enough to permit the passage of small vehicles or perhaps human-sized creatures. And then there are planetary gates, which are often disguised or respond only to electrical, psychic, or other signals, which would seem to indicate a certain amount of intended secrecy on the part of the builders. Many of these gates appear to be defective and can dump a ship randomly into warp space. Others can lead to a place which may have once been a star or a planet, but which are now no more than just empty space. The possibility of emerging into a distant, hostile alien empire is also something to be considered. And finally, we have warp portals, which is a point in space where the warp and real space interface, forming a stable entrance into and exit from warp space. It's not necessary to activate a warp drive to enter a warp in this manner, although any vessel not equipped with a warp shield would more than likely not survive within the immaterium. Some aliens use warp portals to travel between warp space and real space. And just like warp gates, portals occur in all places and may appear on the planet's surface. Some have a definite physical constitution, while others are invisible or take the form of a hole in the ground or a dark cave. Warp portals do have their uses. For instance, a spacecraft with a damaged warp drive trapped within the warp and doomed to destruction, suddenly locating a warp portal enabling them to return to real space would be amazing. And that's the lore on warp travel. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's kind of a quick little tricky question, and it's something that we've talked about very early on because this is one of like the most basic style lore videos, just kind of explaining what it is. But because our old warp travel video was back in 2016, I thought like we need a revamp. And I'm going to start doing that with a lot of our old videos just so that I can produce more consistent lore videos for you guys, but also just because like the quality of those old shows or those old videos are kind of shit. So revamping everything would be really nice. So if you guys have anything that you guys would like me to revisit, or if you guys would like me to talk about anything new, let me know in the comment section below. Any topics or any questions about warp travel, comment down in the comment section below. If the comment is good enough, I'll just create a lore video explaining, you know, an answer to that question. But I do appreciate all of you guys watching and listening. If you guys want to support the channel, hit the like button, subscribe, and also we have a Patreon. Patreon is just $1 a month, and with that dollar, it helps us create more videos and keeps us consistent with these newer videos. So thank you guys ahead of time if you guys do jump over there and support. Like I said, it's just $1. But thank you guys, and we'll talk tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.